Hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News for this Monday, the 10th day of November, 2025. And headlines from around the world continue to support the biblical view of the last days. So let's take a look at them. First of all, from YNET, Israel says decisions on Gaza will be made as Netanyahu meets with Kushner. So the United States and Israel seemingly are going to make a bunch of decisions together. Kushner, like we said, made an unannounced visit into Israel, and they had a discussion today. And so they're seemingly going to go ahead together on this issue with the 200 terrorists in the tunnels and elsewhere. So that's the first story we'll look at. And then from the Jerusalem Post, the United Arab Emirates' reluctance to participate in Gaza's international force is a setback. Again, the story isn't over yet, but the setback is Hamas doesn't want to disarm, and there's nobody but Israel that can disarm them. And so it's kind of moot to find an international force because, like we said, nobody wants to be there if Hamas is still armed. All right. Two other stories. This one from the Jewish News Syndicate. We go way down under to Australia. Police okay a neo-Nazi rally outside New South Wales Parliament. New South Wales is the state that Sydney's in, by the way, in Australia. And so we'll talk about that rally that was a shock to the Aussies and the police. They had a miscommunication that allowed it to happen. And finally, the United States, Columbus, Ohio, from the Columbus Dispatch, Olentangy Schools can't force students to use preferred pronouns, the court rules. Isn't that great? They can't force them. The idea that we even have a case like this, that people would even talk like this was incredible to most of us. But yeah, the whole pronoun thing. So we'll talk about that too and where that fits with last day's Bible prophecy. We're going to explain when we do these stories how each of them fit with what the scripture says will occur at the time of the end before the return of Christ and the many events that'll precede it. The signs are all documented that we'll mention on our website, Educating Our World. In our book, 25 Signs We're Near the End, which is under the heading of Bible Prophecy. We encourage each of you to download the book for free and to look at it and understand what's going on, because you will do like what I do every day. You'll start seeing headlines go, wait a minute, that comes under lawlessness. That comes under anti-Semitism. That comes under, Israel in the world spotlight, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of what we want you to do. So you'll see God's word being fulfilled constantly right before our very eyes, which should give you confidence in God, in his word, and not allow any discouragement or disillusionment to seep in. All right, let's get to the stories. Headline number one from YNET. Israel says decisions on Gaza will be made with U.S. and as Netanyahu meets with Kushner. And this happened again today. Prime Minister Netanyahu and U.S. envoy Jared Kushner discussed disarming Hamas, demilitarizing Gaza, and ensuring the group never regains control. They discussed these steps to fully disarm Hamas and make sure that there's a governing role there. Whoever governs there won't be Hamas. That's kind of where they're at right now. To decide who it will be is a whole other question. An Israeli government spokesperson said this on Monday after the meeting. Bottom line is they can't come to any conclusion now that any um, idea of any support with both sides on who will govern, but it certainly won't be Hamas. That's the one thing we know it won't be. Well, who will? That's up in the air. And the problem, of course, we've said there's no real group that can do something like that from the Palestinian position. They just don't have anybody that would be neutral in something like that. Anyway, the spokesperson said any decision on Gaza will be made in collaboration with the Trump administration. Now, the U.S. officials are seeking to press Israel to allow a negotiated safe passage for some 200 terrorists trapped under Rafah rather than seek their elimination, Israeli officials said. One proposal under discussion would see them surrender, lay down their arms, and receive clemency or deportation while the tunnels they occupy are destroyed, people briefed on the talks said. The diplomatic push gained momentum during Kushner's visit to Israel this week. Kushner, of course, is Donald Trump's son-in-law, his key architect of the recent ceasefire agreement. He met with Netanyahu and other senior officials to press Washington's preferred approach, U.S. and Israeli sources said. A lot of pressure is being applied from the U.S., a senior Israeli official said. Given that, it's hard to imagine we will just simply eliminate them. That's the 200 terrorists that Turks call Palestinian citizens. The assessment is this. The assessment is this can be solved by an agreement. Now, the issue took on a new urgency after the return of the remains of Hadar Golden. He's an Israeli soldier, we talked about this, held by Hamas for more than 11 years. Washington officials hope Golden's repatriation broadened Netanyahu's political room to accept a negotiated outcome, Israeli officials said. Palestinian-American mediator Bashar Baba said he expected an agreement within days that would permit the trapped terrorists to exit into safe Palestinian territory, echoing hopes among mediators for a compromise. Now, here's our comment. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Israel will want to appear strong and determined, but must be careful about any fighting that may result. They do not need a massacre on their hands right now. All right, but also too, while this story is important, it is really important, Israel must keep in the good graces with the U.S. because of the latest that's going on in Iran. There may need to be another strike at their facilities, and striking may be soon. Signs 6 and 7 come into play here. Of our 25 signs near the end, Israel will constantly be in the world spotlight. Here they are again. What are they going to do? The world is asking with these 200 terrorists underground. In sign 7, there'll be a continual search for peace in Israel. Try as they might, they won't get any peace, as we continue to mention. So again, this headline just fits what's going on in our world, and it's sad to see, but it is reality. All right, headline number 2, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates' reluctance to participate in Gaza's international force is a setback, is from the Jerusalem Post. They're considered one of the countries amenable to Israel, making it a more desired presence in Gaza than other countries such as Turkey. In other words, Israel would not mind having a UAE force as one of the forces in Gaza. They do trust them because they have a good relationship with the government. The U.S. also wants to see a Gaza international force put in place in coming months. This is part of the move as phase 2, as Hamas has turned over almost all of the hostages held in Gaza. I think there's something like four left is all. It's like 4 or 5 left, so it's down to the end here. Now, to get international support for an international force, the U.S. has turned to the UN Security Council. The goal is to get a mandate and then move forward with building the force. It has been a month, believe it or not, since the Sinai ceasefire deal to end the war came about. The White House has been keeping the pressure on to move forward and to make sure things don't fall apart. Towards that end, U.S. envoy Jared Kushner is in Israel this week. Reports about the composition of the International Stabilization Force, however, continue to present hurdles to the force actually being formed, as we've talked about a number of times. The latest news is a report that the UAE, United Arab Emirates, might not want to send forces to Gaza. It was never clear if the UAE would send forces. Nevertheless, they're considered one of the countries that's amenable to Israel. It's a member of the Abraham Accords. Jerusalem certainly doesn't want Turkey in Gaza, for instance, and Turkey would raise their hand and go to the front of the line if they could. The UAE does not yet see a clear framework for the proposed international stability force in Gaza, and under the current circumstances will not take part. Now, this is a senior official said on Monday. Reuters reported. Anwar Gargash, diplomatic advisor to the UAE president, said Abu Dhabi would continue to support political efforts towards peace and remain a leading provider of humanitarian aid. Now, the article mentions, and rightly so, the wording of the report is interesting. The UAE is always a cautious country in some ways and is willing to play the long game in the region. For this reason, the UAE was also willing to take the risk of signing the Abraham Accords. It's not always been pleased with how this turned out. It had hoped Israel's government would be more moderate rather than becoming more extreme in its behavior and rhetoric. It's also been very supportive of civilians in Gaza during the last 2 years of the war. It helped evacuate some people for medical assistance and moved aid in via Egypt. It has set up field hospitals in Gaza, also with airdrops of food. As such, it can be seen as a responsible actor in this sense. Nevertheless, the issue who will send forces to Gaza is a complex question. Most countries want to see another country take the lead because, as the heading says here, Gaza is high risk, low reward. That's why they don't want to deploy peacekeepers. There's no ROI, return on investment here. They don't see that for sending peacekeepers, if they get into a firefight in Gaza. So it's a very high risk. On the other hand, one could argue that the UAE's alleged involvement in the Sudan civil war was also high risk with an unclear benefit. So it's not impossible they'll join, but the problem is, again, this is moot until Hamas decides to disarm, because they're not going to send soldiers in from the UAE or Bahrain or Saudi Arabia or wherever else it may be to go into Gaza if Hamas is still there and they are armed. So they want to weigh the long-term benefit. It says they want guarantees from the Trump administration, which has close ties in the Gulf, As such, it can probably persuade the UAE to play some kind of role, like it does in other conflicts, such as in Yemen. And perhaps it could mean, and here's another possibility, helping with private military contractors or incentivizing other countries to deploy peacekeepers. UAE has many friends around the world, which could be beneficial in this respect. All right, as we say in our observations, the problem is continues to be disarming Hamas. They don't want to be disarmed. They're not going to be disarmed, it seems. They've said very clearly they're not. Only the Israelis can achieve this, and that'll be militarily, sadly. However, the longer they wait, the harder it's going to be. Hamas is regrouping, rebuilding, and recruiting. Plus, there is not much of a stomach in Israel for renewed fighting, though it may be necessary. Sign 21 would come into play here. There will be a rise in anti-Semitism. The entire world will be against Israel, and nobody really wants to help them. We're not surprised by this at all. Now, our last two stories are elsewhere in the world. The next one, we move down under for this story. Police okay a neo-Nazi rally outside New South Wales Parliament. This is in the Jewish News Syndicate. New South Wales is one of the states in Australia, a state where I lived in for 4.5 years. Well, actually, about two of the 4.5 years, the other 2.5 years were in Queensland, another state in Australia. Dozens of men clad in black stood in front of the state legislature in Sydney, displaying a banner that read, "Abolish the Jewish lobby." Australian police permitted a neo-Nazi rally to take place on Saturday morning outside the Parliament of New South Wales. Some 60 men from the racist White Australia organization stood in two rows at the front gates of Macquarie Street in Sydney, displaying a large banner on the gates that read, "Abolish the Jewish lobby." ABC News, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, reported the demonstration lasted about 20 minutes, according to police. New South Wales Police Commissioner Mal Lanyon said the state's government found the rally to be offensive, ABC News reported. It was allowed to take place due to an internal communication error, he said, taking the blame for failing to brief the government on the event. Under New South Wales law, if a group notifies the police a week in advance about an intended protest and a court does not prohibit it, the gathering is permitted. The state's premier, Chris Minns, said the rally was distressing and a shocking display of hatred and racism and anti-Semitism, according to ABC News. "I want them to be met with a clear and unambiguous message from the government, from political leaders, from civil life, from average New South Wales residents, that we've got no interest in neo-Nazis in Sydney," he told reporters. Sections 93 ZAA of the Crimes Act, in offense since August, makes it an offense to publicly incite hatred towards another person or group on the grounds of race. Men said that perhaps the police require more powers to protect public harmony. ABC News cited New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies President David Ossip, saying, "It's tempting to ignore the vile demonstration which was held today and avoid giving these dangerous neo-Nazis the attention they crave. But evil left confronted becomes evil but evil that's left alone, that becomes evil that is normalized. The chilling messages and despicable words of hate that were ordered today should never find a home or be accepted in our society, especially outside the heart of our democracy." And of course, that's central there in New South Wales. Alex Reichen, the co-chief executive officer of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, said that conspiracy theories about Jews controlling the governments was more prevalent now, and this is key, more prevalent now than any time in the past 80 years. And this is so true. We hear it everywhere. To defeat this, our law enforcement and security agencies need the right legislative tools to monitor and disrupt violent extremists and to prevent them from menacing and physically harming peaceful Australians, he said. But the single most important thing we must do is restore decency, civility, and basic rationalism to our country, he said. All right, this is another incident that fits sign 21. There'll be a rise in anti-Semitism. The entire world will be against Israel, and so we see it happening down under. Now, I lived there for 4.5 years, and like I said, in two different states and traveled all around the country, and I didn't get the idea that anti-Semitism was a big deal there. It wasn't that prevalent. Now, there are lots of people from the Middle East there, I'll grant you that, but the Aussies are they're laid-back people. In fact, I have a bunch of stories about their lack of religious experience there. They're kind of an who cares attitude. There's a story I got to tell you this one. A number of years ago, when they were building the Parliament in Canberra, they spent like $1 billion, building a new whole Parliament there, buildings and the such like. And Bob Hawke, he was quite a quite a person, shall we say, we'll just leave it at that, was the premier at that time. And someone asked him, well, shouldn't we have some type of prayer or invocation when we, unveil this new parliament? And here was his answer. Now get this. He said, why should we? We're all atheists here in Australia. Now, can you imagine any politician in any other country saying something like that? Well, what was interesting when that happened, my friends, this before I moved to Australia, my friends told me they had a huge rally of Christians from all over Australia came to Canberra and said, no, we're not. There's a lot of us who believe in Jesus Christ here, and there are actually not that many in comparison, but there are a lot of strong Bible believing Christians there in Australia. So anyway, we got that story from down under. And finally, headline number 5, Olentangy Schools can't force students to use preferred pronouns. Court rules the Columbus Dispatch. The U.S. Sixth Court of Appeals has ruled that a central Ohio school district cannot punish students who identify transgender students by their biological pronouns, citing concerns over free speech and discrimination over certain viewpoints. In a 10-7 decision, the November 6th Court majority ruled that Olentangy local schools did not demonstrate that the use of the pronouns to refer to transgender non-binary students would materially and substantially disrupt school activities or infringe on the legal rights of others in the school community. The Sixth Court issued a preliminary injunction that bars the district from punishing students for the commonplace use of biological pronouns when referring to transgender students. The decision also noted, however, that the order does not stop the school district from enforcing its other anti-harassment policies that protect transgender students. So bottom line is if you see a transgender student that's a he trying to be a she, you can call him he, and you're not going to get in trouble, or just the opposite, a she who's becoming a he. And that's what the decision is all about. The majority opinion cited a 1969 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District, saying that the Olentangy School District has fallen far short of meeting this demanding standard. It introduced no evidence that the use of biological pronouns would disrupt school functions or qualify as harassment under Ohio law. Now, can you believe we even have a story like this that we have to deal with? Someone has to put in a court order. Well, if you use the person's correct pronouns, a pronoun that they're born with, he or she, there's no evidence anywhere that would really affect, qualify as harassment or affect their any negative behavior. And so they go on to say our society continues to debate whether biological pronouns are appropriate or offensive, just as it continues to debate many other issues surrounding transgender rights, the majority opinion noted. The school district may not skew this debate by forcing one side to change the ways it conveys its message or compelling it to express a different view. Now, these types of stories come under the category of increase in lawlessness. With the pronoun stories, sign 17, the world will be characterized by lawlessness. In his word, God has set down some universal principles for humankind to observe, one of them being the clear distinction of the sexes. The movement to deny one's biological sex is an affront to the Lord. In fact, we are told in Genesis chapter 2 that God made them male and female. And in Matthew 19, Jesus said the same thing. Have you not read that in the beginning, God made them male and female? That's it. Any attempt to pervert that is lawless behavior, which will result in the judgment of the Lord. So once again, the headlines are filled with confirmations of God's word, as we see every single day, every single episode of breaking news. And again, it confirms that the Lord knows ahead of time what's going to take place. He's told us certain things, like in John 16, when Jesus said to his disciples, on the night of his betrayal, I told you these things ahead of time. So when they take place, you will believe. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.